When I was in 6th grade, I experienced something that would haunt me for years. It started with a boy named Chris, who seemed harmless at first, but quickly became the reason I dreaded going to school. He would follow me around, try to hold my hand, and whisper things that made me uncomfortable. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just a little too friendly. But then the notes started appearing in my locker, disturbing messages about how he watched me, how he knew where I lived, and how we were meant to be together. I told my teacher about it, and she sent me to the school counselor. What I heard next was worse than anything Chris had done. The counselor told me that boys will be boys, that they do crazy things when they're in love, and that I should feel flattered. She said it was something I should accept and learn from. At the time, I believed her, thinking maybe she was right. But looking back, I realize how insane it was for an adult to tell a young girl being harassed that it was normal. That afternoon, I told my mom everything. She was furious. She demanded a meeting with the principal, and when we sat in his office, she asked why nothing was being done. The principal and the counselor sat there in silence as my mom warned them not to speak to me again unless she was present. Unfortunately, I don't think Chris was ever punished. He got away with everything. It didn't end there. One night, when my parents were out shopping, I was in my room watching YouTube when I heard something hit my window. I lived on the 2nd floor, so this was strange. At first, I ignored it, thinking maybe a bird had hit the glass. But then it happened again and again. The thudding was consistent, and it started to scare me. I finally got the courage to pull back the curtain, and my heart dropped. Chris was standing below, holding a handful of rocks. He had figured out which window was mine. He was about to throw another when he noticed me watching. I didn't stay to find out what he wanted. I checked every lock in the house and made sure all the windows were shut. When I got back to my room, I saw 4 messages from him. "Why did you leave?" "I just want to talk. I'm sorry. All I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me. You are not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that. Thankfully, I never had another incident, though I had to see him every day from 6th grade until senior year. The last thing I ever heard about Chris was that he got arrested. I don't know for what, but I can't say I was surprised. What scares me the most isn't Chris, though. It's the fact that a counselor thought his behavior was acceptable. I can only hope that woman no longer works with children. I never want to see Chris again. And I hope I never have to relive anything like that. I've always been a reclusive person, even from a young age. My teachers told my parents I had social problems. I was put in special speech and behavior classes, though I never understood why. Middle school made things worse. Kids formed their friend groups, and by high school, I felt completely out of place. I never had learning disabilities, I just struggled socially. Over the years, I've improved, but I still consider myself introverted. I've made a few close friends, and I'm grateful for that. Dating, however, was a different story. I lost my virginity at 21, which felt late compared to most people. By 23, I'd moved out of my parents' place, had a good-paying job in my field, and even bought a townhouse in my hometown. It was nice. 2 floors, spacious. Something that would impress girls. One day I matched with a girl named Emily on Tinder. We went on a dinner date, and I was sure she wasn't interested. But that night, she texted me saying she had a great time. I was ecstatic. We went on more dates, and soon enough, we were a couple. At first, everything was great, but after a few months, I noticed she was texting me constantly, asking where I was and why I wasn't answering right away. One night, while we were on the couch, she demanded we share our locations with each other. I wasn't thrilled, but I did it anyway. That's when things went downhill. If I was at my friend Phil's house and took too long to reply, she would text me aggressively. One night, when I was hanging out with Phil and another friend, Mark, in Phil's basement, Emily showed up at his house. His mum let her in, and she stormed downstairs, yelling at me for ignoring her. She insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside, where we argued in the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I refused. When I got home, I texted her that we needed a break. She blew up my phone with calls and messages. When I ignored her, she showed up at my townhouse, pounding on my door and ringing the doorbell repeatedly. My neighbor came out and told her to go home. The next day, I stopped sharing my location, and she immediately freaked out. That night, something terrifying happened. I was sitting in my living room looking for a movie to watch when I heard a clicking sound from the dining room. I muted the TV and listened. Then I heard the door to the den creak open. My blood ran cold. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and called 911. Speaking loudly so the intruder could hear, I told the operator I thought my ex had broken in. They told me to wait outside, and within minutes the police arrived. Together we searched every inch of the house. No one was there. I was shaken, but I convinced myself I had imagined it. I went to bed, but I woke up to my phone buzzing. Emily had found a way to text me from a new number. Her messages were frantic, apologizing and begging me to talk. Then she sent "wake up" 8 times. I replied, telling her she needed to leave me alone. The moment I hit send, I heard a scream from inside my closet. Emily burst out, yelling, "No!" and ran at me with a knife. I bolted for the door, slammed it shut, and held it closed as she stabbed at it. Desperate, I told her I loved her and that I wanted to get back together. She stopped. She asked me to open the door. I told her to throw the knife away first. I heard it clatter to the floor. Taking my chance, I yanked the door open and tackled her. I pinned her down and screamed my address into the phone, still connected, to 911. Moments later, the police stormed in. Emily was arrested. She's in prison now. The legal process was long and draining. I don't feel any satisfaction from her punishment. She was someone I cared about, who I thought loved me, but she tried to kill me. I ignored the warning signs because I was too blinded by infatuation and insecurity. I'll never make that mistake again. I moved out of my parents' place at 23, having secured a high-paying job in my field. I had already been working for a couple of years, and with my savings I bought a townhouse in my hometown. It was a nice, spacious 2-floor place, the kind that would impress anyone at my age. I had always wanted my own space, a place where I could finally feel independent. Growing up, I had shared a home with my parents and 2 younger siblings, and while we were close, I longed for privacy. One day, while swiping on Tinder, I matched with a girl named Emily. She was attractive, with deep brown eyes and dark hair that fell past her shoulders. Her pictures gave off an adventurous, fun-loving vibe. She had one of those smiles that made you feel like she knew something you didn't. We started chatting, and she was engaging, witty, and quick to laugh. We decided to meet for dinner at a nearby restaurant. I was a little in my head, worried about how I was coming across, but at the end of the night, she texted me saying she had a great time and wanted to see me again. That made me ecstatic. It had been a while since I'd gone on a date that felt effortless, and Emily had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. We went on several more dates, and things seemed to be going well. She had a charming, playful nature, and our chemistry was undeniable. Eventually, we became boyfriend and girlfriend. The honeymoon phase was exciting, full of late-night talks, spontaneous road trips, and constant attention from each other. It was the kind of relationship that made you feel alive, but soon things started to shift. Emily would text me at all hours of the day, asking where I was, what I was doing, and why I wasn't answering fast enough. At first, I thought it was sweet that she cared so much. But then her texts started getting more insistent. If I didn't answer within minutes, she would follow up with another message. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, she insisted we share our locations. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I had nothing to hide, so I agreed. After a few months, her behavior became increasingly possessive. She would track my location and question me if I was somewhere unexpected. One night, I was hanging out at my friend Phil's house with another friend, Mark. We were in Phil's basement just talking and playing games when, suddenly, Emily showed up at his house. Phil's mom brought her downstairs and Emily immediately started yelling at me, demanding to know why I was there and not answering her texts. The embarrassment was overwhelming. Phil and Mark looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. I tried to de-escalate the situation, but she wouldn't let it go. She insisted that I leave with her immediately. I apologized to my friends and walked outside with her, where we argued in the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I refused. I drove home alone, telling her not to follow me. That night I sent her a long text explaining that I needed space and that we should take a break. I knew breaking up over text wasn't ideal, but I was honestly scared of how she might react in person. She started calling and texting relentlessly, but I ignored her. Then suddenly she began pounding on my front door, ringing the doorbell, over and over. It got so bad that my neighbor came out and asked what was going on. Emily screamed at him, calling me all sorts of names. My neighbor calmly told her to leave. I listened from behind the door until she finally did. The next day, I stopped sharing my location with her. Within seconds, she blew up my phone, furious that I had done so. Every text she sent only reassured me that I had made the right decision. My final message to her was that she was scaring me, and I needed to block her. Surprisingly, she didn't show up again after that. A week later, I went back to Phil's house to hang out. I left around 11 p.m., drove home, and decided to watch a movie while eating a late-night snack. As I was browsing streaming services, I heard a faint clicking noise from my dining room. I muted the TV and listened carefully. The sound came again. It was the door that separated the dining room from the den. I felt a chill run down my spine because I always kept my doors shut. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen and called 911. Speaking loudly on the phone, I said, "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend has broken into my house. Please send someone." I hoped my voice would scare off any intruder. The dispatcher advised me to wait outside, so I stepped out and waited. A police car arrived quickly, and I explained everything to the officer before leading him inside. Together, we searched the entire townhouse, every closet, every crawl space, under every bed, but found nothing. The officer told me to call again if anything happened, which reassured me that he didn't think I was imagining things. That night, I tried to push the incident out of my mind, but I still locked my bedroom door before going to sleep. I drifted off quickly, but sometime later, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I had multiple texts from an unknown number. It was Emily. She had sent long paragraphs apologizing and begging to see me. The last few messages simply said, "Are you awake?" And then, "Wake up," repeated 8 times. I responded, telling her she was acting crazy and that I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. As soon as I sent the message, I heard a scream from inside my bedroom closet. It was Emily's voice shouting, "No!" Before I could react, the closet door burst open. She came lunging at me, holding a knife. I jumped out of bed, bolted for the door, and managed to get out, slamming it shut behind me. She started pounding on the door, stabbing through it. The knife punctured the wood several times, barely missing my side. I held the door shut with everything I had, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to do something fast. Trying to think quickly, I shouted through the door, "Baby, I love you, stop!" I don't know why I said it, but I was desperate. I could hear her breathing heavily, the sound of the knife scraping against the door. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "That's all I wanted to hear. Why couldn't you just be honest with me?" She asked me to open the door. I had to stall. I told her I was scared and that I wanted her to drop the knife first. There was a long pause, and then I heard the clang of the knife hitting the floor. Taking my chance, I yanked the front door open and tackled Emily to the ground. She screamed and fought wildly, but I didn't let go. With one hand, I grabbed my phone and shouted my address into it, realizing the 911 call was still connected. Within minutes, I heard the police kicking down my front door. They stormed in and restrained Emily as she sobbed hysterically. That night was the worst of my life, but it wasn't the end of the nightmare. The legal process that followed was long and grueling. Emily was charged with serious crimes, and although she was imprisoned, it didn't bring me any comfort. This was someone I had once cared for, someone I thought I loved. The whole experience left me shaken, and to this day I struggle to understand how I didn't see the warning signs earlier. I know that this story will stay with me forever. I'd always been a night owl, someone who thrived in the quiet of the late hours when the world seemed to slow down. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which allowed me the flexibility to set my own schedule. My apartment was a cozy one-bedroom on the third floor of an older building, nothing fancy but comfortable. I had lived there for about 2 years without any issues. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and older residents, which made it all the more unsettling when things started happening. It began with small things. I would hear faint knocking sounds late at night, always around the same time, just past 2 a.m. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the old pipes in the building or maybe a neighbor moving around. But then the knocks became more distinct, almost rhythmic. I would pause whatever I was working on, waiting to see if it would continue. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. One night, I was up working on a project when I heard a soft scratching noise coming from my front door. My stomach dropped. It was subtle but deliberate, like someone lightly dragging their fingernails across the wood. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding as I tiptoed to the door. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see an empty hallway, but instead I saw a figure standing just outside the door. They weren't knocking, just standing there, motionless. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't recognize them. It was a woman, her hair disheveled, wearing what looked like a long, oversized coat. Her head was slightly tilted as if she was listening for something. I stepped back, my mind racing. I hadn't heard any footsteps approaching, which meant she had been standing there for who knows how long. I reached for my phone and texted my friend Brian, who lived a few streets away. "Someone's at my door, not knocking, just standing there." He responded almost immediately. "WTF, call the cops." Just as I was about to, the doorknob rattled. It wasn't forceful, just a slow, testing movement. I held my breath, backing away toward my kitchen where I kept a small knife for protection. The rattling stopped, and I forced myself to check the peephole again. The hallway was empty. She was gone. The next morning, I convinced myself it had just been some weird encounter with a lost person, or someone from the building who had mistaken my apartment for theirs. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that she had been standing there, listening. That night, I double-checked the locks before going to bed and tried to put it out of my mind. A week passed without incident, and I started to believe it was a one-time thing. Then, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Why don't you answer the door?" My stomach twisted. I immediately blocked the number, but sleep was out of the question that night. The next evening, I stayed up, sitting in my darkened living room, waiting to see if anything would happen. At exactly 2 a.m., there was a single knock at my door. Not loud, not urgent, just one deliberate knock. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed, and then from outside my door, a whisper, "I know you're awake." I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was outside my apartment. They assured me an officer was on the way and told me to stay on the line. I waited, listening to every creak and shift of the old building, expecting at any moment for the doorknob to rattle again. But by the time the police arrived, the hallway was empty. They checked the security cameras in the building, but the footage showed nothing unusual. No one entering or leaving near that time. I started keeping a bat by my bed and a chair wedged under the doorknob at night. I told myself it was probably some kind of prank, maybe a neighbor messing with me. But then the notes started appearing, slipped under my door, written in shaky handwriting. I see you. Why won't you talk to me? I know when you're alone. I became paranoid, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. I told my landlord, but there wasn't much they could do. I considered moving, but the thought of packing up my entire life and leaving on such short notice felt impossible. I just wanted it to stop. One night, I was watching TV when I heard a noise from my bedroom. My apartment was small, so there wasn't much space for someone to hide. I slowly crept toward the room, my bat gripped tightly in my hands. I pushed the door open, and my blood ran cold. The window was open. I never opened my windows. I backed out of the room, grabbing my phone to call the police again. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. As I turned toward the front door, I saw movement from the corner of my eye, the closet door slightly ajar. I ran for the front door, yanking it open and bolting down the hallway. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing under the